I need the warmth of a man. Two giant Apache girls, said the lone rancher. Tom's life was quiet, almost painfully so. He had been living alone on his ranch for years, miles away from the nearest town, Narration. The New Mexico plains stretched endlessly around him, the land golden and dusty under the hot sun, with only the wind to break the silence. He had chosen this life deliberately. After years of moving from one place to another after heartbreaks and disappointments, he had wanted peace. The ranch was not large, but it was enough. A modest house with a porch that creaked under the weight of time, a barn that smelled of hay and leather, and a corral where his few cattle wandered. It was simple, honest work, and it kept him grounded. Tom rose every morning before the sun as he always had. The rooster's crow was his alarm, the smell of fresh hay his breakfast aroma. He would feed the cattle, repair broken fences, and inspect the water troughs. The wind often carried whispers of the vast land around him, a reminder of how isolated he truly was. His evenings were mostly spent by the fire. Sometimes he would read old letters or the tattered books he had collected over the years, and sometimes he would simply stare at the horizon as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red. He had grown comfortable in his solitude. But that afternoon was different. Tom was inspecting a fence near the northern boundary of his property when he saw something unusual. Two figures were walking slowly across the dusty plain toward his ranch. At first he thought they might be travelers, but as they came closer he realized they were unlike anyone he had ever seen before. They were tall, taller than most men he knew, with a commanding presence that seemed to bend the sunlight around them. Their features were strong and proud, their eyes sharp and alert. It was clear they were Apache women, but there was something more, something unspoken that made Tom hesitate before greeting them. They did not look like they were passing through. Their clothes were practical but well-maintained, and they carried small packs that suggested a long journey. Their expressions were calm but tired, as if they had been traveling for days. Tom felt a mix of curiosity and caution. He had lived here for years without seeing anyone from the nearby villages, and the sudden appearance of strangers, particularly ones who looked so formidable, was unsettling. He stood quietly behind the fence, watching them approach.
When they finally reached the edge of his property, Tom stepped forward.
"Evening," he called. His voice was rough from years of solitude. "You folks need some water?" The taller of the two women tilted her head slightly, assessing him with careful eyes. "We need rest," she said simply. Her voice was calm, but there was an undertone of urgency that made Tom pay attention. "And a place where we can feel safe for the night." Tom hesitated. It was unusual for strangers to ask for shelter, especially in this remote area. His instincts told him to be wary, but something about their demeanor, the way they held themselves, the way their eyes reflected both strength and vulnerability, made him reconsider. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. You can stay. Just don't wander too far." They accepted his offer without hesitation, moving toward the house with quiet grace. As they passed, Tom noticed their size. They were taller than most men he had met, and their presence filled the space around them. Yet despite their imposing figure, there was a gentleness in their movements, a sense of careful observation. Tom felt a strange mixture of intimidation and fascination. Inside the house, he led them to a small sitting room. The walls were lined with old photographs, many of landscapes and family members he had lost long ago. The women's eyes scanned the room briefly, noting the simplicity of the furnishings, the warmth of the fire, and the quiet atmosphere. They seemed comfortable, but their faces carried traces of fatigue and weariness from their journey. Tom offered them chairs by the fire. "You can rest here tonight," he said. "I'll cook some supper." but nothing fancy, just enough to fill the stomach. The shorter woman nodded in gratitude, her expression softening slightly. Breath. "Thank you," she said. Her voice carried a melodic tone, almost musical in its simplicity. As Tom began preparing the meal, he felt their eyes on him from time to time. There was curiosity there, yes, but also a deeper observation, as if they were trying to understand him as he tried to understand them. The evening stretched on slowly, the fire crackling and casting dancing shadows on the walls. Words were few, but in the silence there was a shared understanding forming. Finally, after the meal, the taller woman spoke again. She looked directly at Tom, her gaze steady and unflinching. "I need the warmth of a man," she said. The words were simple, almost startling in their honesty, but there was no demand, no expectation, only truth. Break. Tom froze, unsure how to respond. The line hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and he realized that it was not merely about physical warmth. It was a plea for safety, for trust, for human connection that transcended loneliness and distance. Tom took a deep breath. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he sat down across from them, letting the firelight illuminate their faces. There was a long silence, filled only by the occasional crackle of burning wood. The words repeated themselves in his mind. The warmth of a man. It was a statement that seemed to carry more than it said. A story of loneliness, of hardship, of journeys both physical and emotional. The night deepened, and outside the wind swept across the plains, whispering through the grass and over the fences. Tom felt a strange sense of anticipation mixed with apprehension. The women had come into his life unexpectedly, yet their presence felt natural in a way he could not explain. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of curiosity about another person's life, another person's struggles, and another person's need for connection. As the fire burned low, the taller woman leaned back slightly, her eyes reflecting the flames. "We have been traveling far," she said softly, "and we have been searching for someone who can understand us." Her voice was calm but carried the weight of experience. "Someone who does not judge, who does not shy away from what is strong and what is fragile."
Tom nodded slowly, feeling the truth in her words.
He realized that this night was the beginning of something unfamiliar, something that would challenge his solitary habits and force him to confront feelings he had long suppressed. But despite the uncertainty, there was a warmth in knowing that someone sought not just shelter, but understanding. They talked quietly until the fire burned to embers, sharing small stories of their journey and the lands they had crossed. Tom listened, occasionally offering a comment or question, but mostly letting them speak. There was a rhythm to their conversation, a slow unfolding of trust that required no hurry. Outside, the darkness of the plains was complete, but inside the small house there was a fragile sense of safety and companionship. Finally, Tom led them to the guest room. The women nodded in silent thanks as they settled in. Tom lingered by the door for a moment, watching them, wondering what the future might hold. He realized that their arrival was no ordinary chance encounter. It was a turning point, a moment that would shape his days to come. That night, as he lay awake in his own bed, Tom thought about the line again. "I need the warmth of a man." He understood now that it was not a request for heroism, nor a plea for rescue. It was the human need for understanding, for trust, for shared strength in the midst of a world that often felt harsh and unyielding.
And for the first time in a long while, Tom felt a spark of connection that made the solitude of his life feel less complete.
Outside, the wind continued to sweep across the plains, carrying with it the secrets of the night and the promise of new beginnings. Grasp. Tom closed his eyes, feeling both anticipation and caution, knowing that this night was just the beginning of a journey none of them could yet foresee. The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, spilling gold and amber light across the plains. Tom woke early, as was his habit, to the familiar sounds of the wind rustling through the dry grass and the distant lowing of his cattle. For a moment he almost forgot the visitors in his guest room. But then he remembered the two tall Apache women, still asleep, their presence quietly altering the rhythm of his life. He felt a mix of curiosity and unease. He wasn't used to sharing his space with anyone, let alone strangers whose appearance alone seemed larger than life. By the time the women emerged from the guest room, the ranch was alive with morning energy. Tom had already fed the cattle, drawn water from the well, and prepared a simple breakfast of eggs, bread, and coffee. The women moved with purpose, yet with an unfamiliar grace that caught Tom's attention. They didn't need instructions, but they observed quietly, absorbing the rhythm of the ranch. "Do you want some coffee?" Tom asked, offering a steaming cup to the taller woman. She accepted it with a nod, her long fingers curling around the cup.
"Thank you," she said softly.
Her eyes scanned the horizon briefly, taking in the fences, the barn, and the small cluster of trees that marked the edge of the property. "This is very different from where we come from," she added. Tom nodded. "It's quiet here. Perhaps. Far from towns and crowds. Most people wouldn't find it comfortable." The shorter woman poured herself some coffee and added a little cream. She smiled faintly at him. "Comfort is different for everyone. Sometimes quiet is what you need most." They ate together in companionable silence, the fire crackling gently beside them. Tom noticed small details, the way the taller woman's eyes followed the sun as it rose, the way the shorter woman's hands moved deftly while breaking bread. There was a quiet intensity in both, a sense that they were absorbing every detail of the ranch and its owner. Tom felt both observed and welcomed at the same time, a strange combination he wasn't used to. After breakfast, Tom decided to take them on a tour of the ranch. "I'll show you the fences and the water troughs," he said. "Narration. You can see the cattle, too. They're harmless mostly, but curious." Narration. The women followed him across the dry, sun-warmed land. Their movements were deliberate, careful, yet there was an air of power in every step. Tom explained the routines of the ranch, how he fed the cattle, how he checked the fences, and how he kept the water clean. They listened intently, asking questions at times, not out of doubt but out of genuine interest. "You manage all of this alone?" the taller woman asked, her voice tinged with admiration. "Mostly," Tom replied. "I've been doing it for years. It's hard work, but it keeps me grounded." The women exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of his resilience.
"It must get lonely," the shorter woman said after a moment.
Tom shrugged. "Sometimes.
"But I've grown used to it. You learn to find company in small things. The wind, the animals, even your own thoughts."
There was a brief silence, broken only by the low hum of cicadas in the nearby trees. The taller woman tilted her head slightly, considering his words. Breaths. "Loneliness can be heavy," she said finally. "It changes how you see the world, how you see yourself." Tom felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, recognition perhaps, or understanding. He realized that this encounter was not just about their physical presence, but about the shared experience of solitude. Here were two people who had traveled far, carrying their own stories, and now they were intersecting with his quiet life in a way that demanded attention. Over the next few hours, the women proved themselves capable and independent. They helped mend a broken fence, working side by side with Tom. Their strength was remarkable, each movement precise, efficient, and powerful. Tom watched as they lifted heavy beams, tied ropes, and handled tools as if they had been doing it for years. He felt a mix of pride and humility, pride that they were willing to work alongside him, and humility in the face of their quiet competence. As the sun climbed higher, Tom suggested a break. They sat under the shade of a lone mesquite tree, drinking water and wiping sweat from their brows. A taller woman leaned back against the tree, her eyes closing briefly as if soaking in the warmth of the sun.
"This place," she said softly, "it feels different from the lands we left behind."
There's peace here, even in the hard work. Tom smiled faintly. Peace doesn't always come easily, but it's there if you look for it. The shorter woman, still holding her water bottle, looked at him seriously. Do you ever wish for more than this? More than solitude and routine? Tom paused, thinking. He had learned to live with his choices, to find satisfaction in the simplicity of ranch life. But their question stirred something he hadn't felt in years. The longing for companionship, for someone to share the quiet moments and the burdens alike. Sometimes, he admitted finally, but I've grown used to it. Life has its own rhythm here, and I've learned to follow it. There was a quiet understanding between them then, an acknowledgement that their lives, though very different, were not entirely separate. They had all experienced challenges, isolation, and the weight of responsibility. Yet in this shared space, amidst the dust, the sun, and the cattle, there was the possibility of connection, fragile, tentative, but real. The afternoon brought new tasks. The women helped him sort the cattle, moving the animals from one pen to another. Their size and strength made the work easier, and Tom was impressed by their calm authority with the animals. He realized that their presence was not just a matter of companionship, but a practical advantage. But it was more than that. There was a rhythm to their work together, an unspoken coordination, a silent conversation that transcended words. As the day wore on, they rested again by the barn. Tom noticed how the taller woman's expression softened when she watched the cattle graze, how the shorter woman's laugh, quiet but genuine, broke through the usual silence of the ranch. Despair. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a realization that life could be richer when shared, even with people he barely knew. By evening, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Tom prepared a simple dinner over the fire, while the women gathered wood and set the table outside. The air was cool now, and the wind carried the scent of dry earth and distant juniper trees. They ate together under the fading light, talking quietly about their journey, their experiences, and the lands they had left behind. The taller woman spoke of her village, of the mountains and rivers, and of the people she had known. Her words carried pride, sorrow, and resilience. The shorter woman shared stories of childhood, of games and chores, of lessons learned and lessons passed down. First, Tom listened, captivated by their voices, by the depth of their experiences, and by the openness with which they shared them. When the fire burned low, they sat in silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast night sky. Tom felt a sense of calm he had not known for years. The women's presence was comforting, yet it challenged him in ways he did not fully understand. He realized that the warmth they sought was not only physical or emotional. It was trust, understanding, and the quiet knowledge that someone could share your burdens without judgment. Before retiring for the night, the taller woman looked at Tom again, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "We have been traveling long," she said softly, "and we have learned that strength and patience are rare. But we have also learned that kindness can be found in unexpected places."
Tom nodded, feeling a deep connection he had never expected.
He understood then that the events of this day were not just routine chores on a ranch. They were the beginning of something new, something that would challenge his solitude and open him to experiences he had long avoided. The women were no longer strangers. They were companions in a journey that none of them could yet predict, but all of them could feel in their hearts. That night, as he lay awake, Tom reflected on the day's events.
The women had not only assisted with the work, but it also reminded him of the power of connection, of shared effort, and of mutual respect.
He thought of their laughter, their stories, their strength, and their vulnerabilities. For the first time in many years, he did not feel the isolation of his life as sharply. Instead, he felt anticipation, curiosity, and a fragile hope that life could be richer, even in the quietest and most unexpected ways. Outside, the wind swept across the plains once more, carrying with it the distant songs of nightbirds and the faint rustle of leaves. Inside, the fire cast soft shadows on the walls, illuminating the faces of two women who had already begun to change the rhythm of Tom's life, even if they did not yet know it. And somewhere in the quiet, unspoken understanding that had begun between them, there was the seed of a connection that promised warmth, trust, and the possibility of companionship. The following morning, the air was crisp and clear, carrying a faint scent of sagebrush across the plains. Tom woke early as always, and for a moment he hesitated before heading out to the barn. The past 2 days had been different from any he had known. The two Apache women had become a quiet presence in his life, their strength and grace leaving a mark on him he hadn't expected. Yet beneath the calm surface, he felt a restless energy, a sense that life on the ranch would soon test them all in ways no one could predict. The women were already up when he went outside, but the taller woman was checking the cattle near the northern fence, while the shorter one was gathering firewood along the edge of the trees. They moved with purpose, but their faces carried a shadow of fatigue. Tom realized that the journey they had undertaken was not only long but taxing, and the ranch work, though familiar to him, added another layer of challenge. "Morning!" he called softly, trying not to startle them. "Morning," they replied in unison. There was no need for small talk. The rhythm of the land seemed to speak for itself. Tom began his morning chores, feeding the cattle and checking the fences. But today was different. A storm had been gathering on the horizon since dawn. Dark clouds crept across the sky, blotting out the sunlight and making the plains feel colder and harsher than usual. The wind began to pick up, carrying the scent of rain and distant lightning. Tom knew that storms in these parts could be dangerous. Low-lying areas flooded quickly, and cattle could panic if they sensed danger. He called winning over. "We need to get the cattle secured and make sure the pens are strong." They nodded immediately, moving toward the corral without hesitation. There was no fear in their movements, only focus. Tom felt a strange mix of relief and admiration. Their presence was not just comforting, it was reassuring in a way that he hadn't experienced before. As the storm approached, the wind whipped across the plains, rattling fences and bending trees. Dark clouds loomed, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Tom and the women worked together to secure the pens, moving quickly but carefully. Their hands were steady, their voices calm, issuing instructions and encouragement as they worked. "This fence post is loose," Tom called. "Can you hold it while I tie it?" The taller woman stepped forward, her long arms steadying the post without a word. Tom tied it firmly, appreciating her strength and precision. Breaths.
"Thanks," he said, nodding. The shorter woman helped guide the cattle, her calm presence soothing the animals as they shuffled into safer pens.
Breath. Tom watched her closely, impressed by how naturally she handled creatures so much larger than herself. "You've got a gift with them," he said quietly. She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting both pride and modesty.
"We learned early," she said.
Survival requires patience, understanding, and respect, not just strength. The storm grew stronger, and the first real rain began to fall in heavy sheets. The plains became slick and muddy, and thunder rolled across the distant mountains. Tom realized that the work of keeping the ranch and the cattle safe was far from easy, and yet, for the first time in years, he did not feel alone in facing it. The women's presence was not only helpful but grounding. Their confidence gave him courage he hadn't known he needed. Hours passed in a blur of effort. Mud clung to boots and clothes, and the rain soaked through layers, chilling them to the bone.
Yet they worked without complaint, moving with purpose and coordination.
Pa began to notice something more, subtle glimpses of vulnerability.
The taller woman occasionally flinched at the sharp flashes of lightning, and the shorter one rubbed her arms when the wind cut through her clothing.
Their strength was evident, but it was clear that even the strongest could feel fear and fatigue. During a brief pause, Tom handed them blankets from the barn. "Desk. Here," he said. "You'll need these while we wait for the worst to pass." They accepted them gratefully, and for a few moments they simply stood under the shelter of the barn, listening to the storm. The taller woman's voice was quiet when she spoke. "We've faced many storms," she said, "but sometimes even strength needs help." Tom nodded slowly, understanding exactly what she meant. "We all need help sometimes," he replied. "Even the strongest. The hours of work, the storm, and the shared struggle brought them closer in ways words could not." They did not speak much after that, but their cooperation was effortless, almost instinctive. The cattle were secured, the pens reinforced, and the storm slowly began to move eastward, leaving behind a wet, glistening landscape. The air smelled of earth and rain, fresh and clean, and the plain seemed reborn under the storm's passage. Exhausted but relieved, they returned to the house. Tom lit a fire, and the warmth of the flames filled the room. The women removed their wet coats and blankets, their faces flushed from the cold and exertion. Tom prepared a simple meal, a stew warmed over the fire, and they ate together in silence, savoring both the food and the quiet aftermath of the storm. As they sat by the fire, the taller woman spoke again. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but carried the weight of honesty. "We've been traveling a long time," she said, "and we've learned to protect ourselves. But sometimes the world reminds you that even protection isn't enough. You need trust. You need someone to rely on." Tom looked at her, absorbing the words. Bert. He understood now that the warmth she had spoken of earlier was more than comfort. It was a need for security, for human connection that could withstand storms, both literal and metaphorical. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I think that's something we all need, in one way or another." The shorter woman added her voice, gentle and reflective. "We've been strong because we had to be. But strength is not just about standing alone. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let others in." Dom felt a lump in his throat. He had spent years building walls around himself, living alone, keeping others at a distance. But now, with these women in his life, he realized that strength and vulnerability could coexist.
The experience of the storm had revealed more than just physical endurance. It had exposed emotional truths, the need for trust, and the possibility of companionship.
After the meal, they sat quietly by the fire, listening to the rain that still fell softly outside. Tom noticed how the women's faces softened in the warmth of the room, how their posture relaxed in a way that showed both relief and comfort. He realized that they had been carrying burdens from their journey, just as he had carried his own solitude. And in that moment there was a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement that life could be harsh, but it could also offer moments of connection and care. Later, as night fully settled over the plains, the taller woman approached Tom. Her eyes were thoughtful, reflecting the firelight. "We've been strong, but it's clear that strength alone isn't enough," she said. "Sometimes you need the courage to let someone help you, to share the burden, even if only for a short time."
"I've learned that today," he admitted. "It's not easy for me to rely on anyone, but I see now that it can make life richer, more bearable." The shorter woman, standing nearby, gave a small, approving nod.
"That's all anyone can hope for, to find people who understand, even for a moment." As they prepared for bed, the storm finally moved out of sight, leaving a sky full of stars and the plains glistening with rain. Tom reflected on the events of the day. The storm had tested their strength, patience, and resilience. It had revealed fears and vulnerabilities, but it had also created a bond that words could not fully capture. For the first time, he felt a sense of unity, a feeling that life, even with its hardships, could be shared, and that warmth, trust, and companionship could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. That night, as he lay in bed, Tom thought of the women and the challenges they had faced together. He realized that the bond they were forming was not fleeting. It was built on shared experiences, honesty, and mutual respect. And while the storm had passed, it had left behind something more enduring. A sense of connection that promised to shape their days to come. A warmth that went beyond physical presence. A trust that could carry them through future hardships. Together. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the plains stretching endlessly under the soft glow of the sun. The storm from the previous day had left the world washed and fresh. Puddles dotted the dusty land, reflecting the sky, and the air smelled of wet earth and sage. Tom stepped outside, feeling a quiet satisfaction in the calm after the storm. But he also felt a shift within himself, subtle, yet undeniable.
Life on the ranch was no longer the same.
The two Apache women had become part of his world, not as visitors but as companions in the routine and rhythm of daily life. The taller woman was already near the corral, checking the cattle as she had done every morning. The shorter one was stacking firewood, her movements precise and careful, yet there was a lightness to her that had not been there before. Tom watched them for a moment, noting the way they moved with purpose and grace, blending strength with ease. Their presence had begun to feel natural, almost as if they had always been part of the ranch, even though he knew their arrival was recent.
"Morning," he called, carrying a bucket of feed.
"Morning," they replied, their voices carrying a quiet warmth that matched the rising sun. As they went about their chores, there was a new rhythm to their work together. Tasks that had once been solitary now carried a sense of cooperation and understanding. They moved as a team without needing constant direction, anticipating each other's needs and filling gaps with quiet efficiency. Tom felt a sense of relief he had not known before, relief in knowing that he did not have to carry every burden alone. After feeding the cattle, Tom suggested a walk across the plains to inspect the fences and the land that stretched beyond the ranch. The women agreed, their tall figures moving confidently alongside him. The sun rose higher, warming their backs, and for a moment they walked in companionable silence, listening to the distant call of birds and the whisper of the wind.
"You have a beautiful place," the taller woman said finally.
Brow! Even in its simplicity, it feels alive.
Tom smiled faintly. It's nothing special to most people, but I've come to appreciate it. The land, the animals, the routines. They teach you patience and respect. The shorter woman looked around thoughtfully. "It's the quiet that strikes me," she said. "You can hear yourself think here, hear the land breathe." Tom nodded, realizing that she understood more than she let on. There was a depth to their observations, a sensitivity that spoke of experiences and journeys beyond the plains. He felt a growing respect for their insight and perspective, recognizing that their presence had begun to change not only his routine, but also the way he perceived the world around him. As the day progressed, they returned to the ranch and began repairs on a section of the fence damaged by the storm. This time the work was less urgent, but it carried the same importance. Together they lifted posts, tied ropes, and hammered stakes, their movements coordinated and precise. Tom felt a sense of pride and gratitude. He realized that the women's strength was more than physical. It was mental and emotional. A calm resilience that complemented his own experience and knowledge of the land. During a short break, they sat under the shade of the mesquite tree, sipping water and watching the cattle graze. The taller woman spoke softly, her eyes following the animals. Inspiration. "We've been traveling for a long time," she said. "And in all that time, we've learned to rely on ourselves. But relying on others, that takes a kind of courage." Tom listened carefully, understanding the weight of her words. "It does," he replied. "But courage isn't just about standing alone. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let someone in, even if only for a moment." The shorter woman nodded. "That's true," she said. "We've been strong because we had to be. But strength doesn't mean you never need help. It means you know when to accept it." Tom felt something shift inside him. For years, he had prided himself on independence and self-reliance, keeping others at a distance to avoid complications or disappointments. Yet now, with these two women, he realized that connection, trust, and shared effort could enrich life in ways he had never imagined. The storm, the work, and the quiet conversations had opened a door he thought had long been closed. As the afternoon wore on, they continued their work on the ranch. The women moved easily through the tasks, their confidence and competence clear. Tom found himself noticing more than their strength, their small gestures, the way they exchanged looks and subtle signs of understanding, the occasional shared laughter that broke the monotony of work. It was in these moments that he realized their bond was growing, forming in quiet, meaningful ways rather than through grand declarations or dramatic events. By evening, the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. Tom suggested preparing dinner outside by the fire, a small change that felt natural and comforting. The women gathered wood and helped set up the space, moving in tandem with the ease of those accustomed to working together. They cooked a simple meal, sharing stories of the lands they had crossed and the people they had met along the way. The taller woman spoke of her village, of the mountains and rivers, and of traditions that had shaped her upbringing. Her voice carried pride, wisdom, and a quiet longing for connection that transcended the distance she had traveled. The shorter woman shared childhood memories of games, chores, and lessons learned under the guidance of family and elders. Tom listened, captivated by their stories, their perspectives, and the way they revealed strength tempered by vulnerability. As the fire burned low, they sat quietly together, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast night sky. Tom felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. The women's presence was comforting, grounding, and challenging all at once. He realized that warmth, trust, and companionship were not just about sharing meals or work. They were about understanding, patience, and acceptance. "Base." The taller woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "We've seen many things in our lives," she said softly. "And we've learned that strength alone isn't enough. You need patience, understanding, and the willingness to let others in." Tom nodded. "I've learned that too," he said. "It's not easy for me, but I see now that connection can make life richer, even in the quietest and simplest ways." The shorter woman added, "And it's not just about sharing work or stories. It's about recognizing each other's humanity, respecting it, and allowing trust to grow naturally." For a long time they sat in silence, the fire flickering and casting gentle shadows on their faces. Tom felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected bond that had formed between them. The days of isolation and routine had not disappeared entirely, but they had shifted. Life on the ranch was no longer solitary. It was shared, enriched by the presence of those who had walked a long distance to find understanding, and who had, in turn, offered it freely. That night, as they prepared for bed, Tom reflected on the transformation of his world. The storm had been a catalyst, testing strength and resilience, but it had also opened a door to trust, companionship, and mutual respect. The women had brought warmth, both literal and metaphorical, into a life that had been long defined by solitude. Their shared experiences, quiet conversations, and cooperative work had created a connection that was both unexpected and profound. As he lay in bed listening to the wind whisper across the plains and the distant calls of nocturnal animals, Tom realized that life could be richer and more meaningful when shared. But the women's presence had changed the rhythm of his days, brought new perspectives, and reminded him that strength and vulnerability could coexist. Their companionship was not just a comfort, but a reminder that life's most important lessons often came from the people we allowed into our world, even if only for a fleeting time. Outside, the plains glistened under the moonlight, the remnants of the storm still evident in puddles and wet grass. Inside, the fire had burned low, leaving only warmth and memory in its place. Pause. Tom knew that the days to come would continue to test them. The land, the weather, and the challenges of life on a ranch were constant, but he also knew that they would face them together. Trust, patience, and shared effort had become the foundation of their bond, and he felt a quiet confidence that it would endure. In the soft darkness, he thought of the women's words, the way they had spoken of strength, courage, and the importance of allowing others in. He realized that the bond they were forming was not temporary or superficial. It was rooted in understanding, respect, and shared experience, the kind of connection that could withstand storms, both literal and metaphorical. And as he drifted into sleep, Tom felt a sense of calm and anticipation. Life on the ranch had changed, and with it, he had changed too. The presence of the two Apache women had brought warmth, trust, and companionship into his once solitary world. Their shared experiences had created a foundation for a bond that was growing stronger each day, promising not only safety and comfort but also the possibility of a richer, more meaningful life. The next morning was calm, with a soft breeze moving across the plains. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the air carried a quiet freshness that came after the recent storm. Tom woke early, as he always did, but this morning felt different. He could hear the soft murmurs of the two Apache women moving about the house, and for the first time, the sounds of others in his home felt comforting rather than strange. The presence of the women had become part of his daily life, a natural rhythm he had not known he needed. They shared breakfast together in the warm kitchen, talking quietly about the day ahead. Tom noticed how relaxed they seemed, how natural their laughter had become, and how easily their voices blended with the sounds of the ranch. The taller woman offered a suggestion for inspecting the far side of the property, and Tom found himself smiling, appreciating her initiative. He realized that her confidence and insight were not only practical but reassuring. After breakfast, they set out across the plains to check the fences and the water sources. The cattle moved alongside them, curious but calm, sensing the harmony among the group. The women walked confidently, scanning the land with sharp eyes, pointing out areas that might need attention, offering advice, and asking thoughtful questions. Tom felt a growing respect for their intelligence and intuition, marveling at how quickly they had adapted to the routines and challenges of ranch life. During a brief pause, they sat under a large mesquite tree, sipping water and watching the plains stretch endlessly before them. The taller woman looked at Tom and said softly, "You've built a strong life here. It's quiet, steady, and reliable, but it's also open in its own way." Tom nodded. "I suppose it is. I've spent years learning to live with the land, the animals, and my own company. But having you here, it makes it feel fuller. Breaths less empty." The shorter woman added, "Fullness doesn't always come from people or possessions. Sometimes it comes from connection, understanding, and trust." "You've offered that, even without realizing it." Tom felt a warmth in his chest at her words. For years he had lived alone, believing that solitude was the safest way to live. But now he understood that life could be richer when shared, even in small, quiet ways. The storm, the work, and the long days together had formed a bond stronger than words could describe, a bond built on trust, mutual respect, and understanding. As the day wore on, they returned to the ranch and focused on repairs and small improvements. The women moved easily, handling tasks with strength and precision. Tom felt a sense of gratitude for their presence, realizing that they had not only helped with physical work but had also enriched his emotional life. He noticed their small gestures of care, smoothing a rough edge on a fence, gently guiding a calf, offering quiet encouragement, and he understood that warmth and compassion could take many forms. By late afternoon, the three of them sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. The plains were bathed in gold, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and grass. The taller woman spoke quietly, almost wistfully. "Our journey will continue," she said. "We cannot stay forever, but we will carry this time with us." Tom's heart sank slightly, but he nodded. "I understand, and I'll carry it too. You've brought something into my life I didn't know I needed."
The shorter woman smiled softly. Sometimes people appear in your life to remind you of what matters.
Desk, strength, resilience, trust, and warmth. All of it matters, even if only for a short while. The sun finally disappeared behind the distant hills, leaving a sky filled with stars. They ate a simple dinner outside, enjoying the cool evening air and the quiet of the plains. Conversation flowed easily, touching on memories, experiences, and hopes for the future. They laughed at small stories from the journey, reflected on lessons learned, and shared moments of silence that spoke more than words ever could. As night deepened, the taller woman stood and stretched. "Bird, we will leave at first light," she said softly. "But I want you to know the warmth, the trust, and the companionship you've offered us will remain with us, always." He had come to care deeply for these women, not just as companions but as mirrors reflecting the parts of himself he had long ignored. The need for connection, the value of trust, and the quiet joy found in shared effort and understanding. "And you've given me something I never expected," he said. "A reminder that life, even on the quietest plains, can be rich and meaningful when shared." The shorter woman added, "We hope that your life continues to be full even after we are gone. Remember that strength and warmth are not separate things. They grow together and they are found in the people you trust and care for." That night, Tom lay awake in bed, listening to the soft rustle of the wind through the trees and the distant calls of night animals. He thought about the days they had spent together, the labor, the laughter, the stories, and the quiet moments of reflection. Their presence had transformed his life in ways he could not have anticipated. The bond they had formed was subtle but enduring, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. Morning arrived quietly, with a soft glow that promised a new day. Breath. The women packed their belongings, their movements calm and deliberate. Tom assisted where he could, but he knew that this departure was inevitable. Their journey would continue, as theirs always had, and though he wished they could stay, he understood the necessity of their path. Before leaving, the taller woman placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Take care of yourself," she said, her voice steady but full of feeling. "The warmth we shared is not just mine or hers. It is yours too." "Carry it forward," the shorter woman nodded. "And remember, trust and connection are not weaknesses. They are strength. You've learned that here, and it will guide you in the days to come." Desk. Tom watched as they walked across the plains, their tall figures moving with purpose, blending strength and grace. A part of him felt empty at their absence, yet another part felt fuller than it had in years. He realized that life had given him something rare, a glimpse of connection, warmth, and trust that had opened a door to emotional growth he had long denied himself.
In the days and weeks that followed, Tom returned to his routines, but he did so with a new perspective.
The ranch felt the same. The plains stretched as they always had, and the animals continued their steady rhythms. Yet everything felt subtly changed. He was more attentive to the quiet moments, more aware of the importance of trust and companionship, and more willing to let others into the spaces of his life. Breaths. Sometimes, when the wind swept across the plains, he imagined the taller woman's eyes reflecting the firelight, the shorter woman's gentle smile, and the way they had moved with confidence and grace through both the storms and the quiet days. Those memories brought warmth to his heart, a reassurance that life could be full, even in solitude, if one remembered the lessons of trust, compassion, and shared strength. Tom began to reflect on the nature of human connection more deeply.
He understood that the bond they had formed was not temporary or shallow.
It had been built on shared experiences, vulnerability, and respect. Even though they had departed, the impact of their presence remained. Their time together had taught him that warmth was not simply about physical comfort, but about emotional safety, mutual understanding, and the willingness to share life's burdens. He also noticed a change in how he approached his work. Tasks that had once felt routine now carried a sense of meaning and reflection. He worked with patience, care, and attentiveness, remembering how the women had handled challenges and how their strength had inspired him. Every repaired fence, every well-tended calf, and every quiet evening by the fire reminded him of the lessons they had imparted. Weeks later, as he walked across the plains, Tom could still feel their presence in subtle ways, in the rustle of the grass, the warmth of the sun, and the quiet rhythm of the land. He realized that connection did not always require constant proximity. Sometimes it existed in memory, in reflection, and in the ongoing influence of those who had touched your life in meaningful ways. Though life on the ranch continued, it was now richer, fuller, and more textured. Patience, trust, and warmth would stay with him for years to come. He had been reminded that solitude and companionship were not opposites but complementary forces, each enriching the other when balanced with respect and understanding. And so, the rancher who had once lived alone in the quiet expanse of the New Mexico plains now carried the memories of two Apache women whose presence had changed him. Their journey continued beyond the horizon, but their influence remained in the simple routines of daily life, in the quiet moments under the stars, and in the ongoing care of the land and animals. Tom found warmth, trust, and connection, gifts that would endure long after the women had gone, shaping his world in ways both subtle and profound.